Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Meeting of the Minds webinar. Today we're going to be talking about when machines do everything in smart cities, 21 jobs of the future. During each webinar, we take a reading on who's joined us. So you'll see a poll pop up right now asking which sector best defines you. If you can just fill that out for us, that'll help our attendees as well as our presenters know exactly kind of who's in the room with us today. My name is Jessie Feller-Hahn, and I'm the Executive Director of Meeting of the Minds. As many of you know, Meeting of the Minds is a global thought leadership network and platform for knowledge sharing with year-round digital and in-person programming. We connect global urban sustainability, innovation, and technology leaders across sectors to share best practices, tools, and solutions through our blog, monthly webinar series, and more than 20 events each year in North America. You can find all of our upcoming events, including our webinars, in the events section of our website at meetingoftheminds.org. A few housekeeping notes to begin. Because of our very large audience in attendance today, you will remain muted throughout the event. A recording of today's webinar will be available on our website after the event for you to share with colleagues that couldn't make it today. You can also find 2 PDFs in the handout section in the control panel, which you can download right now. That's from our presenters, Robert and Desmond, who provided those 2 handouts. So at the very bottom of the control panel, you can see those 2 PDFs. We will have a Q&A during the second half of the hour. When you have a question, please type them into the questions panel in your attendee control panel as you think of them. So we'll see the quick poll results. Who's with us? Private sector, 45%, public sector, 30%, nonprofit sector, 20%, and a mix of 6% left over from philanthropy and academics. Thanks so much, you guys. That's helpful. We really would appreciate your input regarding today's webinar, so a short survey will pop up when you close your browser at the end of the event. And I'm pleased to introduce our 2 presenters today. Robert Brown is Associate Vice President at the Center for the Future of Work, a global think tank with a charter from Cognizant Technology Solutions to examine how work is changing and will change in response to the emergence of the age of algorithms, automation, and AI. His research emphasis has been on the topics of robotics, automation, privacy, and augmented reality and their impact on business processes. Desmond Dickerson is also joining us. He's a manager in Cognizant Center for the Future of Work. He's leveraging his experience in digital transformational marketing and consults clients on optimizing digital strategies that prioritize user experience and engagement. His research with the Center for the Future of Work focuses on the human impact of business decisions related to technology development and deployment. So I'm going to pass the ball over to Rob. Over to you.
Jessie, thank you so much, and so good to be with everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to join Desmond and I today to really talk about what is one of the fundamental questions of the age, this question of what to do when machines do everything. And so we from the Cognizant Center for the Future of Work have a really specific point of view on this. And work obviously is broken down into specific jobs. And when it comes to smart cities, we think that the future is really bright. And we want to take you on a tour of some of our most recent thinking and research to open that aperture and give you a sense of what we're thinking about and what we see in the future. So you are absolutely seeing the signs of this everywhere. I mean, this is a subject that is literally in the headlines every single day. I don't know if any of you have seen this or played around with this. A little screenshot from the BBC News website from a couple of years ago. But it's a little widget you can put into the box. You know, I am a salesperson, or I'm a marketing executive, I'm a farmer, even if you're a CEO. And this will give you back the probability of a robot taking your job. And so welcome to the year 2019. That's the high irony of this, is that now a robot will give you the probability of a robot doing your job. But that's where we are. And this is one of the sort of rather controversial and alarming statistics in the sweepstakes of the future of work, is going back to the data set that's behind this, which is from Oxford University from, I believe, 2013, which basically is a part of their methodology. It took a snapshot in a period of time of all of the tasks that underlay jobs in the year 2013. So with that as a backdrop, how will jobs actually change as a result of technologies? And not just jobs, but tasks. And again, we want to get into the specifics about smart cities as to how those changes are going to play out. So with that on background, there's also ridiculous manifestations of some of this technological change as well. This is the Hena Hotel, which in English from the Japanese translates to weird hotel. Japan, in many respects, is in the leading edge of robotics capabilities and technologies. But this hotel, basically, you would come and check in, and there would be a robot that would take your bags to your floor. And in fact, you have to love this. If you can have a check-in attendant that is a robot, why not have a check-in attendant that's a robot in the form of a dinosaur? The coda to the Hena Hotel, the weird hotel, is that it went out of business very recently, I believe within the last 6 months. So it gives you a sense of the sublime and the ridiculous. But make no mistake, no matter what you're seeing in your headlines, the stories come out of Washington, Brexit, you name it, with the possible exception of climate change, artificial intelligence is the great story of our time. And we're seeing it accelerating across a lot of different industries. And just to do a roundup of just a few, in the banking sector, of which Cognizant is a big player in the IT services space, 8 out of 10 of the top hedge funds on Wall Street are now using algorithmic platforms to do their trading. In the medical sector, the level of accuracy for robotic platforms for radiology is now at 99.6% accuracy versus 82% for the best human radiologist. So does this then suggest that in the future of work that the doctors that aren't using the platform are perhaps guilty of malpractice? To be determined, but watch this space. When it comes to autonomous vehicles, this data of 222 million miles driven, this is the Ford autonomous vehicle prototype. This data is actually slightly out of date. It's bigger than this now, but for every journey that those autonomous vehicles are making, it informs the algorithm with a positive feedback loop. And Desmond is going to talk about this in much greater detail in a moment in terms of the impact on autonomous vehicles. And last but not least, in the legal profession, this is a case study, I believe, from J.P. Morgan Chase, and a discovery process that would have taken their human paralegals 2 weeks with an e-discovery platform took them 2 hours. So again, welcome to 2019. This is the world in which we live. And it's generating mixed emotions. On the one hand, is this a capitalist dream or sort of a labor nightmare? We're coming to you live today from San Francisco. We're in the crucible of Silicon Valley. There's a lot of excitement about these technologies, the technical wonder, the art of the possible. What will it mean for municipalities in the future? But there's also absolutely fear of layoffs. What about my job? What about your job? What about our coworkers that we care about? What about our kids? What should we be coaching perhaps our teens and even younger kids about what types of jobs they should be looking for in the future? And then obviously, if you have a direct line of sight to strategy for your firm, what does it do to your company structure? So that, on the one hand and on the other hand, is very, very palpable. And when we think about work today, the nature of work, the ergonomics of work, if you think about, again, in Silicon Valley or across the United States, in the West, this is kind of what workplaces look like. And are we entering very rapidly an era where something that looks like this is kind of maybe the land that time forgot? It's an open question, but we want to use that as a backdrop to take you on a tour of how we think a lot of this is going to manifest in smart cities in a moment. In our work in the Center for the Future of Work, we really boiled down the first principles of the future of work. Number one, never short human imagination. And what we mean by that comes onto the second, which is that human wants and needs are really inexhaustible. And third, nature abhors a vacuum. And if you are a business person, not only does nature abhor a vacuum, it abhors high gross margins as well. So hopefully for most of us on the call today, we're part of this in making cities smart so that they run well. Some of us are business people. We want to be able to make money as well as we go through this journey. So keeping those three principles in mind is a really important part of the conversation. What it boils down to in a lot of our research is that there is a very clear balance, what we would call the blend of the art of the job and the science of the job. Let's talk about the art of the job for a moment. People are very good at the art of the job. judgment. It's extremely easy for humans. It's hard for computers. So things like visual cues, emotion, empathy, judgment, ethics, and social context. Basically, being able to answer the question, what's the right thing to do? Machines, on the other hand, are outstanding at what we would call the science of the job, the computational capabilities. Those are very easy for computers. Heavy data analysis, pattern recognition, being able to answer this question based on all statistical evidence. What's the most appropriate next action? Next best action. Next best action. You hear that over and over, and not just within smart cities, but across the application of technology to jobs of the future. So whether you are a cop or a nurse or a mayor, even a sports coach, even a CEO like Sir Richard Branson himself, every single job that we do can benefit from an augmentative capability of a machine. And when you put that blend of the art of the job and the science of the job together, really powerful things can happen. And in fact, a lot is being talked about right now with respect to organizational change management and the modern human resources function. The future of work is a road that will run right through HR capabilities and sorting out which goes where. Which skills will go to the bot? Which skills we need to double down on in humans will be sort of like the Harry Potter sorting hat of our time, of sort of Slytherin and Gryffindor. Which skills will sort of couple from that task list of jobs and which will go where. In fact, we wrote a book about it, what to do when machines do everything. And it was really sort of the field guide, if you will, in terms of how to move through this process. If past is prologue, let's take a look into the past for a moment. This guy is Edwin Budding. And he invented the lawnmower in 1827. And in fact, he was sort of using his prototypes in the dark of night, a little bit embarrassed about it. You know, does it actually work? Well, actually, yes, it does. It's making grass uniformly flat and even. And as a result of that, yes, he did put out of work some people that would try to go out with sickles and scythes and try to do the same thing. Not as well. But nevertheless, at the same time that Budding invented his lawnmower, in England, you also had the first industrial revolution. And suddenly, for the first time in the West, you had the advent of free time. And suddenly in England, you had the development of things like cricket and lawn tennis and associated football, SOC, soccer, as we know it in America. In this country, you had the advent of baseball, football teams. And so fast forward to today, the Budding effect has led to the creation of a $620 billion sports industry out of thin air, which would have been very difficult to have envisioned in 1827. And when we talk about the sports industry now, we're talking about not just the athletes or the people that build stadiums, but the people that buy tickets within the stadium. We're talking about sports marketing agents. We're talking about people that sell beer inside the stadium. That halo effect is vast, and it is a stunning lack of imagination to think that today's technology won't have a large-scale budding effect. And if you squint and you start to look around, you see examples of the budding effect everywhere. 15 years ago, who could have imagined the following help wanted ad? Twitter data wrangler, apply within. Well, today, in the modern marketing function, the social media manager is the most in-demand role. And so 15 years ago, if I had said Twitter data wrangler, you would have looked at me like I was nuts because Twitter didn't exist. So in sum, we are optimists. Every aspect of work life gets better. Maybe not as much as this guy, but it will get better. A few years ago, we undertook research within the Cognizant Center for the Future of Work, where we asked 2,000 executives at or near the C-suite of their businesses around the world, what are the skills that you're going to need to drive your business over the next 5 years? And as you can see on this spider diagram, the blue bit was where they were at in 2015, and the green bit is where they think that they were going to need to be by 2020. And so all the way around that spider diagram, from the top, number one is analytical thinking, global operating skills, strategic thinking, leadership, innovation, decision-making, selling, customer care, learning. All the way around that wheel, every single one of those skills is an innately human skill. And in fact, it's not going away. It's getting bigger in terms of demand. And if you're mathematically oriented, the delta on those averages out to about 15%. So the answer to the question is, what to do when machines do everything, is we have to be better humans. We have to find our 15%. And where are we going to get that 15% margin? We're going to get it from technology.
And with that being said, hey guys, this is Desmond, just jumping in here. Also taken from our What to Do When Machines Do Everything. This chart here, it really sums up and really flies in the face of what a lot of us think about AI and how jobs will be impacted. A lot of people think in terms of the haves and the have-nots. Who are the folks that are going to be replaced, and who are the folks that are going to be just, more empowered or have new jobs because of it. But we focus a lot on the middle ground. We look at 75% of the jobs that we feel are going to be enhanced by AI and other associated technologies. But it is still very important to consider, as we look at the budding effect and how that's created new roles, entirely new industries, we still want to look at that 12%. What's going to happen to these folks, and who's going to be impacted the most? So last year I took on a study of that 12% crisis through the lens of the trucking industry. Across America, that is the most popular job in 29 states. It's essential to all of commerce, particularly e-commerce, as we're all accustomed to getting our packages and products within 2 days. So a thought there is, as jobs or as vehicles become autonomous and these trucks are able to drive themselves, what is going to happen to the drivers that were previously doing that job? So while there is a good bit of conversation, we look at a lot of new options, a lot of new skills, and a lot of new opportunities that are going to be presented to these folks. There's a few different companies and different technologies that are being approached that are just touching the landscape of this in several different areas. So we're looking at autonomy here, and if this looks like a video game, that's one of our thoughts here, that the video gamers of today are going to be the workers and drivers of tomorrow. So we've got human operators that, instead of having to drive across the country, which makes this job very grueling and keeps folks away from their families, they're able to do it remotely, locked in with the assistance of 5G and other technologies. Also, we're here in San Francisco, where the bar pilot is pretty popular over in the Bay, and just considering how that might impact the truckers as well, where we've got a bunch of vehicles that are zipping around and folks are kind of operating them, near but not within the vehicle, and just focused on some of the short haul transportation issues that we've got. And third, we've talked about, or we've looked into the Peloton Method, which is platoons of trucks where you've got your trucking leader there in the front, and they're able to be tracked by AI technologies. And we've got 2, 3, maybe even 4 trucks that are following behind them. So able to do this more efficiently, using less manpower, but also less resources, as the trucks following close in line with one another don't require as much gas. So whatever happens, however this shakes out, we do see drivers being unshackled from the wheel. That doesn't mean unshackled from a job. Instead, we see that they're able to add even more value to the supply chain. Maybe that's order processing, maybe inventory management, or customer service, or sales, or whatever other factors that we feel could be useful as we're moving those goods across the country. Because once you answer the question of what to do when machines do everything, the next question is, what exactly are the numerous jobs that are going to come to pass? So we took a look at that as well. In 2017, we started with 21 jobs of the future, creating a guide to getting and staying employed over the next 10 years. We followed that up in 2018 with another 20 jobs, just creating that roadmap of what these new careers we think are going to be. So we'll walk through a couple of the premises that were common themes throughout all of the jobs that we assessed. Most importantly, coaching, connecting, and caring. We see these as enduring traits or things that have always been important to human existence. Coaching, we're teaching people how to do things better, how to live better, connecting. That is connecting the person with the machine and figuring out how do we optimize those relationships. And then finally, caring. As we live longer, we're giving many more amenities. We have to focus on how do we care for people in the workplace and beyond. So the first of those jobs that we looked at, highway controller, specifically important to the smart cities to come. So the future of transportation, it's making us rethink the way we manage our roads and our airspace. For right now, we've got our highways, we've got our surface streets, but in the years to come, perhaps we've got drones flying all over, or we've got vehicles that are on the road and then aerial and then back to the streets. So how are we going to manage all that? How are we going to keep all that safe? There's already examples of drones hitting passenger planes in North America, as well as other countries. So obviously, this is going to be a very high-stress job. We're looking at automated road and space monitoring, emergency management. How are we moving around those essential goods and people to get where they need to be? Autonomous vehicle monitoring, and just the complexity of a now 3D, multimodal transportation situation. And we see this highway monitor as a key job for the future of work and specifically for smart cities. Moving forward, vertical farm consultant within the coaching space, something that we also see as a key role in the future. So we've got populations that are continuing to grow in city centers. And the impact of climate change is putting more and more pressure on the food supply chain. So we've also got our consumers that are more and increasingly savvy about the fresh food they get, more plant-based diets, and shortening the time between the farm and the table. So we see vertical farms as a solution that can meet every demand that we've just discussed here, and specifically useful in a connected community. We've got multiple companies, whether it's freight farms or Grow Intelligence, and these types of companies, they're outfitting farms, they're sensoring farms, and using every bit of AI data that we have now to ensure that the food is grown in a very protected environment, something that's resilient to any sort of climate change. So this role, managing the farm of the future, it's particularly hands-on. This isn't just a tech role. This isn't something where you just sit back and let things happen. With managing the farm in the future, we're seeing this as something that requires a green thumb. First of all, you've got to have the knowledge of agriculture and being out amongst the plants and understanding how that works. But we also need someone who is digitally savvy enough to make sure that the sensors and the digital aspect of things that we're outfitting these farms with continues to work. And then ultimately, it goes hand in hand with building up communities and building up the knowledge of those communities to know how to use these products, know how to use these services to enhance their lives.
Yeah, it's interesting in terms of this trend. You think about the budding effect, and like I said before, you squint and you start to see it everywhere. And you think about organics. A generation ago, organics was a very, very niche industry, and now players like Walmart, Amazon, they are scaling those operations like crazy. But think about how consumers will go into a store of tomorrow in the future and say, I want the freshest leafy greens I can get. The vertical farmer on site has grown this for you. And I think this bespeaks, one of the premises behind 21 Jobs of the Future and 21 More Jobs of the Future is we wanted to focus on jobs that were not just for a handful of people, but jobs that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people could do. And one of the things that emerged on that basis of, you look out into the future, there's sort of three new themes that we saw emerge in 21 More Jobs of the Future. Ethical behaviors. The last 12, 18 months has been a huge focus in Silicon Valley on ethics, but security and safety, obviously that's going to be hugely important for smart cities of tomorrow. And then dreams. You talked a little bit about, Desmond, the flying car developer. Who of us, when we weren't little kids, didn't think about, gosh, where's my flying car? I certainly did. Right. But, is that a dream? Well, the prototypes are out there, and, you sort of blink, and the next 10 years goes by, and dreams become reality. And so that's important. Specificity counts in this conversation. We'll keep this rolling for a few more of these, just to, again, open the aperture into the jobs that we focused on. Let's think about cyber calamities for a moment, and the ability to forecast this. Obviously, it's going to be material for smart cities, but also for actuarial science and for insurance. So we know all about natural calamities. Hopefully not anything as dire as the thing on the right, but from Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico to close to where we are, Santa Rosa being vaporized in a firestorm, Paradise, California, and on and on. This is happening with quite a bit of regularity. But let's think about cyber for a moment, okay? So how does a job like a cyber calamity forecaster think about the possibilities? What's been overlooked? What's around corners? What are the laws of unintended consequences? And expose them and figure out what are the manifestations of this in a cyber world. I mean, again, we're here in Silicon Valley. There's a lot happening, and I've done a lot of research on augmented reality and this notion of becoming AR cloud, where everything you see is sort of this immersive augmented world. How do you forecast that? And so governments, industry, society, individuals, they're all going to have to play a role with regards to this. So clearly this is one of the jobs, we said that 21 jobs of the future is set up like a 2x2, and the x-axis is time, the next 10 years, when are they going to hit the next 10 years? The y-axis is tech centricity. This is probably a job that's going to take a bit more of a focus on electrical engineering, computer science know-how, because you're going to need to understand how the AI platforms are working and how you're going to need to monitor them. But also indexing. What are the probabilities? And then, just spot checks. What doesn't feel right? What is the platform maybe overlooking? And so there's a bit of sleuthing, if you will. We've all heard of data scientists. This is going to have an element of the data detective to it as well. We touched on vertical farms. This one's a little bit, similar swim lane. We talked about natural disasters. Let's talk about the Tidewater architect role. Again, we're in San Francisco today, but, cities like Osaka, Japan, Shanghai, China, New Orleans, Louisiana, as sea levels rise as a result of climate change and the safety and security bucket, Tidewater architects are going to be really important. Now, there's a lot of thinking. The science behind this is real, and it's sort of a combination of floats, moats, and super dikes. The meeting of the minds, folks, you'll recall in Sacramento last year, we had a wonderful presentation about the implications of this for San Francisco Airport. But what we've seen to date, even in places that are as on the cutting edge of engineering like the Netherlands, this is about walling back nature, pushing nature back. How in the future might we work with nature and not against it in cities all over the world? And in fact, if you think about the implications for the future of work here, this isn't, one person called a Tidewater architect that's going to do this. It's going to have a massive halo of jobs that will form around what is basically huge civil engineering undertakings. So everybody meet Joe. This is Joe. It's sort of an old-timey picture, black and white. In fact, this is Joseph Strauss. And Joseph Strauss, when he built the Golden Gate Bridge, he didn't single-handedly do it. There were hundreds upon hundreds of people that built the largest civil engineering project on the West Coast at the height of the Great Depression. And so that was riveters, that was painters, it was steam fitters, steel workers, graders. And so the thinking around Tidewater architects is that it will sort of set the agenda, but then there will be a halo effect of workers around them that help build out these improvements to smart cities everywhere. And in fact, on the sort of squint and you see them principle, I'm talking about Joe. Let's meet Marta and Paul Kephart, specifically of Rana Creek. And in fact, you may know some of their work. If you have been to San Francisco, you'll know the Living Roof at the California Academy of Sciences. When it reopens, hopefully very shortly, the Skyway adjacent to the Salesforce Tower but they have just won a subcontract for the work that's going to be happening at Ennis Creek in the southeastern corner of San Francisco, and that is an absolute example of being a real-life Tidewater architect. So you're starting to see the pieces be put in play. And we'll round it out with one that I think is going to be material to a lot of the folks that are in the tech sector that are listening to this, the Cyber City analyst. This is in the caring category. We need to care about how we make our cities smart. It's happening all around us. Desmond talked about autonomous vehicles, the deep research that he's done in that. And we think about how we're going to be surrounded by things like the coming AR cloud. 5G is here, all right? And this is here. And so this job is going to need to be good at a multitude of capabilities. Yes, you need to be understanding of the deep technical implications of smart cities and the devices that make them smart, but also working in teams of others that understand that as well. And also, we talked about that notion of data science and how, algorithms will manifest in coming years a huge amount of the data science, but how can you be a detective and understand how the data is being used? Yes, in ethical and safe ways. And then if the worst comes to worst, how do you make sure that you handle the outcomes of unintended consequences of cyber cities? So this opens the aperture a bit on 21 jobs of the future that will apply to smart cities, 21 more. So if you take those two baskets, we now have 42 jobs of the future that if you read our report, please download it. Each one of these jobs is written up as if it was a job description from the HR department of the future. These are the skills, the qualifications, what the job is going to entail. And let it be, in some ways, your roadmap for the strategies that you need to put in place in the future. And as we said, specificity counts in this conversation. It's a funny thing about working for the Center for the Future of Work is, the future is always in the future, but it starts tomorrow. And I think this quote from Kevin Kelly of Wired is such a great way of thinking about this notion of, this is not going to be the death of all jobs as we know it. It's the genius of robots, removing a tumor in our gut through our navel, making a talking picture video of our wedding, driving a cart on Mars, printing a pattern on fabric that a friend mailed us through the air. We are doing, and are sometimes paid for doing, a million new activities, not merely chores that were difficult before. Rather, they're the dreams that are created chiefly by the capabilities of the machines that can do them. They are the jobs the machines make up.
So, the new machine and you. We talked about the agricultural sector in terms of vertical farming. And if you look back 100 years ago, 80% of jobs were in the agricultural sector, to today being at 2% and actually falling.
And we talked about the notion of the land that time forgot. What does work look like? What does municipal work look like? What does work in smart cities look like? Do we potentially go from 60% looking sort of like this land that time forgot to 5% over the next 50 years? And that's where, again, we think that our research can be instructive and informative to help you focus on some of the specifics. And our advice to you is to focus on the next 10 and not the next 50. And it is our hope that things like 21 jobs of the future for the smart city will in some ways be your field guide for those next steps. And with that, we'd like to thank you very much. Jesse, back over to you to open up for questions.
Great. Thanks, you guys. Perfect. And we'll move into a Q&A for the audience now. You can type your questions into the Q&A panel at the right of your screen in your control panel. We have some already. A lot of people are wondering if the recording will be available after, because some people want to share with colleagues. Yes. We always record our webinars. This will be available tomorrow on our website, on our event page, and we will keep it up on our calendar page under events. If you go to meetingoftheminds.org, it will be available there. We will also be emailing it out to those who registered and are with us today as well, so you can forward that on to your colleagues. There's also two handouts at the bottom of your screen, at the bottom of the control panel. Rob, do you want to share what those handouts are exactly for folks? What they're about?
Yeah, absolutely. So they are downloadable PDFs of 21 jobs of the future and 21 more jobs of the future. So definitely encourage everybody to grab copies of those, check them out. Again, they're kind of written up as JDs from the future. If somebody said, I need a voice UX designer and I need 50 of them like yesterday, what does that job description look like? So please do download those and check them out.
Definitely a starting point for you to start to look at what these jobs of the future look like at your own business.
Great. Thanks for that. Perfect. And we'll also attach those on our event page so you guys have those after the event as well. Lots of questions coming in. First question from Kathleen Bolter. I guess maybe over to you, Rob, first, and then Desmond. As more and more skills are required of workers, what do you see as the impact on wages? These middle skilled jobs are being revolutionized, but wages for middle skilled jobs have remained mostly flat. Do you guys think employers actually will be willing to pay more? Rob, first to you.
Yeah, and so it's absolutely spot on. It's such an apt question. I would say you look at a lot of variables in the future of work, in the present of work, in the recent past of work, and that median wage number has been relatively stuck in neutral for the last generation. And so that's in part due to policy. In part, it's due to the phase out of some jobs and some other jobs. But I feel like it has ticked up just a little bit very recently, to be fair on the data. But the success or failure of the future of work in large part will stem from that. I mean, again, a lot of the variables that you see out there, whether it's fights over politics, the haves, the have-nots, the regional carve-outs of certain parts of the country, coastal divide, all of it stems from that very question. What is happening with median wage income distribution? And it's not just in the United States. I was in Mexico City last week and talking about, some of these trends in that market. And, each one of these forces is manifesting in different ways in different countries around the world. Will it change? I certainly hope so. You are seeing distribution swing pretty wildly. And again, that is a policy conversation that we all need to be having at the political level. And so it's sort of the Uber question du jour when it comes to, no pun intended, by the way, it's the question of the day when you think about things related to the future of work.
The way I look at it is that, whether wages rise or fall, I think that AI and robotics and different technologies are allowing more value to be captured. So looking at things like the gig economy, these may not be necessarily high-paying jobs, but when they're augmenting folks that are already working, or maybe they have a suite of gig working opportunities that they're doing, it's presenting new opportunities to gain wages.
One of the things I'd share just as a final thought on that is within the last 9 months, we have rolled out what we're calling the Cognizant Jobs of the Future Index. So a lot of you may be listening to this and saying, well, this is all very nice and well, it's sort of futuristic and they're projecting to the future. And it's based on a lot of the strategic trends that we're seeing. Note, to be sure, the Jobs of the Future Index is a way to prove the hypothesis. And so in short, sort of like the Dow Jones is, it's a moving average of stocks every single day. When the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out the new job openings number, every quarter we update the Jobs of the Future Index. And so you can actually see the reality of our index of jobs of the future peeling away from the rest of all jobs. And so that is an interesting way of capturing the job openings growth, but that issue of wages is something that is very, very important to look at as well.
Great. Question from Allison Klein. She says, I'm a reporter from Education Week, which is read by school superintendents and K through 12 administrators. What kinds of things should they be emphasizing to prepare students for these 42 jobs of the future? Maybe Desmond, you first, and then Rob.
Sure. Very good question, and a place where I think all of this needs to start. I think that schools would do well companies would do well to reach out to schools and start to develop those partnerships. We see this as a transition from what's traditionally in America, you've got your kindergarten through 12, and then 4 years of college maybe, or maybe some additional higher education, graduate level after that, to lifelong learning. So one, just instilling that in the students that, hey, you're gonna get to graduation year, but that's not going to be the end for you. You're always going to be learning, always going to be growing. As the market changes more and more rapidly, you'll need to always be able to add to your skill set. So I think just teaching that critical thinking and teaching just abilities to research and adaptability, those types of traits, I would say those are key to be teaching at the elementary, middle, and high school level now.
And this notion of lifelong learning doesn't hit the nail on the head. This is a bit of a cliche at this point, but the notion that you go to high school for 4 years, or then go on to university for 4 years, and that's it, you never learn, is an absolute fallacy. We're going to all be learning new skills and new capabilities as we move along the journey of our own individual future of work. Again, I go back to the data that we showed, that notion of 15%. Where are you going to get the 15% to double down on the things that are going to be important to your growth as an individual, as a worker, to maybe move into different disciplines? We're also living in a time where the access to education theoretically has never been easier. The education capabilities are here, but it's not evenly distributed. Yep. And so being able to forge those pathways, shine bright lights on success, what's working across all manner of communities in the United States and other locations of the world is really important. I think about something like finance and accounting is a classic example of, just a back office function that every business needs to have. But maybe it's in a small family business and somebody in the finance function knows how to use Excel pretty well. They know how to use maybe the macros feature in Excel. There is absolutely online courses that can take some of those skills and allow that person to transition into a role like programming for Google TensorFlow, which happens to be the largest open source AI platform in the world. And so I think for a lot of people, this notion of I can't move, I'm frozen, and this thing is going to wash over me, and there's nothing that I can do about it. The pathways are there. We just need to be able to shine a much brighter spotlight on where they are. And just the last point, because again, like the previous question, it's a really, really big and important topic with a lot of vectors to it. You hear a lot about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Super important. 21 Jobs of the Future, again, has the y-axis, which is level of tech centricity as you move from bottom to top. However, the humanities are more critical now than ever. We talked about ethics. Ethics are a huge part of what needs to play out. And so I was at an event recently here in Silicon Valley, and a very senior executive of a very, very large social media company was sort of glibly saying, well, I took an ethics class once when I was in college. And it's like, that is so important right now. And, there's all manner of things having to do with antitrust that potentially could be coming down on the industry. We need to pay much more attention to that. So anyway, lots to unpack there. Great question.
Great.
All roads lead to their education.
Perfect. And actually, to follow up on that, Jean Sass was asking, say you have a daughter starting college in September, what do you tell her? So this is past the K through 12, but what are 3 core skills and or processes that she might tune into? Rob, over to you first.
No, this is great. It's such a timely question.
Now we know ethics. Yeah.
Yes, ethics. No, this is so timely because I'm in the same boat. I have a teenage daughter that's going to be starting university come next fall, and she loves math. I don't know where she gets it from. I major in history, but she loves math. And if you look at the statistics on electrical engineering and computer science majors, this wide gulf between male, typically white male, graduates out of those programs and sort of everybody else. And so there's this sort of weird, I would say it's weird, but there is a self-fulfilling prophecy that sometimes there's this notion imparted to young women that, well, hey, girls don't go into those fields. And that notion to me is unacceptable. So I think we're living in a time right now where it's beginning to change. There is a tremendous amount of hard work that needs to continue. In fact, Desmond and I are going to be both at a Cognizant event in the heart of Silicon Valley in Mountain View tomorrow on the issue of diversity and inclusion. So it's very near and dear to what we're thinking about in the Center for the Future of Work. So anyway, if you have someone who is focused on, who likes doing math, engineering, the deep science pursuits, more of that. How do we raise them up, close those gaps, and bridge the pathway to the future? We talked about ethics. That's really, really important. And I think, as our data showed from the research that we did, the ability to communicate and understand how these jobs of the future are going to, again, sort of thread three connective common themes, all of which have to do with dealing with other people, coaching, connecting, and caring. So that's how I would answer that.
Yeah, for sure. I think, again, touching on the humanities, sociology, psychology, and then just pairing that with whatever technical, elements, maybe that's research, maybe it's, geography or technology, whatever it is they want to do. I just advocate for balance. That gives them the most opportunity to find what's of interest to them at some point, and then have a diverse set of skills that are going to guide them through.
Great. Question from Angelina Rahimi. Maybe Rob, over to you first, and Desmond. If you have $10 million to spend on workforce development for a very low-income, disadvantaged community, what would you do? Wow, what a question. Rob, first over to you.
$10 million of development in disadvantaged communities. Yeah, for course development. It's a great question. I would say, we need to make sure that visibility into STEM is a feature that's being communicated into those communities first and foremost. I have a feeling that there is not nearly as much emphasis being put into disadvantaged communities about the possibilities that technology will afford for jobs of the future. I also think a part of that is going to be, like I said before, it's the ability to shine the spotlight into individuals that showcase the path forward, that maybe if they don't come from the community, perhaps look like folks in the community. And the last thing that I would say, and I don't know if it's the pathway for investment, but there is oftentimes a temptation for well-meaning people to show up in the community and have all the answers and all of the solutions. And I think we need to flip that script a bit, maybe a lot, to listen to the conditions within the community, the standards are in the community. In fact, Desmond and I have talked about this quite a bit. You think about smart cities and hey, we're going to put in an e-enabled bike lane into your neighborhood. Well, do they want the bike lane? Did anybody listen to the community? That's not exactly answering the question about where do you put the investment dollars, but that notion of listening as opposed to dictating is really important. Desmond?
Yeah, a great transition, because that's what I was going to lead with, is just starting with listening, surveying, interviewing, asking the folks, what's important to them. And then beyond just the specific, hey, we're going to teach you how to code, or we're going to teach you data analytics. I think putting money into ensuring that, if they're young people, that there's, safety and security in terms of they're able to get to class easily, there's food for them, whatever it is, so that these other basic needs are met. It's very easy to spend 12 hours a day on YouTube or Khan Academy or wherever, pouring into these new skill sets when your other needs are met and all you have to do is learn. So I think with disadvantaged communities, there's a more holistic view we have to take a look at. Maybe if it's parents or older crowds, then making sure that childcare is provided and that they're able to make sure their children are taken care of while they're learning and trying to advance themselves. So I would make sure that a good amount of the money is spent on just the research to understand the community better, and then money to provide those auxiliary services. And then from there, you take your findings, you take your learnings and understand what are the inherent skill sets or the inherent interests or what are the opportunities that these folks already see for themselves in the world, and then how can we add new skill sets to help them achieve those goals.
Great. Another term we use a lot is wraparound services in the social policy space. But yeah, great. And over Desmond, one more question for you from Cheryl Wiebe. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Cheryl. Can you describe a little about your research methodology at the center? Who do you ask? What questions? Where do you guys get your data? First, Desmond, over to you.
Sure. So we use a number of different vendors that do the research for us, and they go out and they'll interview, industry experts or executive leadership within particular industries. So that's usually the base of it. And then we'll go out and we use the readily available data. So maybe it's jobs data from the U.S. or from other countries, or maybe it's UN data that talks about, economic development across the world or in different specific regions. So using the strong data that's already out there in the world, and then we combine that with what we're able to do with our specific asks of our research companies, and then ourselves just going out and interviewing folks and talking to the leaders that we come across via these webinars or other speaking engagements that we have, and then just sharing that knowledge internally with other team members. That's been my approach thus far, and enjoyed the learnings that I've been able to do, and then creating new knowledge as well that others are able to pull for their own research.
I would say, just to add on to that, the Center for the Future of Work was founded in 2011, and Desmond comes from the consulting background. I came into Cognizant from Gartner, where I had a research career of about 15 years. There's a number of other analysts within the team as well that come from both of those backgrounds. And so that heavy research side is kind of infused from the get-go with the work that we do at the center. Just to give an example right now, I'm doing a big piece on augmented reality, which is called The Real Reality of Augmented Reality. And so I'm working with Oxford Economics to do that research. Desmond, you're doing
Future of Food. Yep.
And also using Oxford for that as for the primary research. The last thing I would say is our academic partnerships. So here in the States, we do a lot of work with Harvard here in the Bay Area, the Haas School of Business over at Berkeley. MIT, the World Economic Forum. Some of you that are here local to the Bay Area may know WEF has its Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So we break bread with a lot of different outlets in terms of not doing just hard and fast primary research, but also getting the trends and inputs and sort of understanding the zeitgeist of how it helps drive our agenda. The question about inner cities is really interesting. The Aspen Institute, which is also something that we've been quite involved with, has given us some insights for starters into some of the policy initiatives that are driving that debate, and that's open doors. If any of you have been involved, obviously with Jesse, with the Meeting of the Minds, you guys break bread with a lot of very interesting folks, many of whom are on the call today. But also events like the Upswell conference, which was in Los Angeles last year, which was just for the nonprofit sector. So by way of Cleveland, long answer to the question, but there's a lot of parties that the Center for the Future of Work is involved with to help grapple with some of the answers to those questions about the future.
Great. Thanks, guys. Lots of questions that we probably won't get to all of them, but we're going to try. We'll get to a few more. Eleni Tricata, she has a good question. She's asking, are professional bodies going to adapt to these changes? Do they prescribe new professions? How can higher education adapt to new professions? So there's a lot of questions that have come in about how do transportation engineers adapt? How do Uber and Lyft drivers adapt? How do tech design side, UX design, or so I guess the question is, are you guys working with professional organizations or associations to help entire industries adapt rather than piecemeal? And are you seeing those associations being proactive about finding new pathways for their professions? Maybe over to you, Rob, first.
I was going to have Desmond take a crack at it just from the trucking side.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's
Desmond.
a ton of professional organizations and unions and the Teamsters and whatnot that we first reach out to and talk to them and ask what's going on within their spaces and what are they seeing. But really we through doing this research, through doing this work and having these outputs, it's just starting those conversations with them. We don't have the ability to say, hey, you need to do this, you need to make this change. It's incumbent upon them to see what is in the best interest of their members, and take the data, take the information and the findings that we put out there, and then make adjustments. Oftentimes we're talking to organizations specifically at client meetings or what have you. But when we go to these conferences or when we're at any other sort of social engagements, we're able to really rub shoulders with some of these association leaders and just put the bug in their ear and let the conversation go from there.
I think that just to add on to that, every industry is dealing with these changes. No one is immune. I give you an example. Last year I wrote a piece on the media and entertainment industry, and we all kind of think about, media and entertainment is glitzy and glamorous, and LA, all of the jobs in that sector are very, tech intensive. In actual fact, there's a tremendous amount of work to be done, even in that sector as well. So I spoke at the Hollywood IT Society at the Skirball Center in Los Angeles last year and talked about, what does this mean from a, changing of the guard, so to speak, where I think there's something like, the Hollywood film industry is $43 billion. It's changing like lightning speed. You have the advent of things like, we talked about, augmented reality and virtual reality, which are going to be huge, but what does that do to the jobs of the future? Talk about trucking, right? The American Trucking Association, I think you were telling me, they're saying there's like a deficit of 50,000 truckers in America today because young people kind of see the writing on the wall that maybe I don't want to go into trucking. But there's a deficit, and so there's a supply and demand issue. Healthcare, 1/6 of the U.S. economy. We do a tremendous amount of work in that industry. Cognizant corporately does, but both on the payer side as well as the provider side. Yeah. So again, in terms of our research and our travels, the work that we do, we definitely talk to industry participants and people that are trying to make a difference as the individuals in those industries go through the changes.
Great. Last question. I'm going to combine 3 or 4. How can the public sector adapt, and what can city and county planners and public sector leaders, city managers, local government, what kind of training and retraining for workers can they do, or what kind of programs have you seen set up in cities that have been really effective? Maybe over to you first, Desmond.
Right. So in the white paper I did on autonomous vehicles in the trucking industry, a big part of it was about a 3-part harmony between local governments, federal governments, and then the private sector as well. So I think a big part is just reaching across the aisle and having those partnerships. Understanding that the private sector has their needs. There's new jobs that they need and certain deficits that are already in existence. So with that knowledge, I see these governments as the go-between of the private sector and the educational aspect of things. And they're able to bring everyone together to understand, all right, how are we equipping our citizens with what they need at a local level, or federally? Are there just certain specific skills that we need to make happen? So I think that's their biggest role right now, is just being that conduit between the private sector and the jobs they need, and then the education system and how they're funding it, or how they're developing policies that will augment our learners in addition to what they're already learning. And the only thing I would add to that
Rob,
is just 30 seconds. I mean, down to the individual level, it's make time to be strategic. I think as Malcolm Gladwell said, you need 10,000 hours of practice to be a master at anything. Well, forget about 10,000 hours, but
on the principle of 15% change,
Mhm.
how are individuals in the public sector and then by extension their management carving out the time that they need? Maybe it's 10 hours, a month to be inculcated and get an exposure of some of the new approaches, the best practices. That business as usual is not going to cut it for very much longer.
Yeah.
They need to change, not just the workers, but also the people that are leading public sector agencies. And we're all very blessed in America to live in a liberal democracy, and we have the ability to make these changes. And so those are what the tools of the future of work are going to allow us to do.
Perfect. And I also want to just do one quick plug, as Rob will be speaking on stage at our October 3rd event in Sacramento, and that event page is going up on our website in the next week. So look for that at meetingoftheminds.org. So, and hopefully, Desmond, you'll be able to join us there as well. It'll be a half-day event focused on smart cities and sustainable cities. So with that, a short survey is going to pop up once you close your browser, and we really appreciate everybody's feedback. We hope to see you at one of our upcoming events, which are all available in the event section of our website at meetingoftheminds.org. And a big thanks to our presenters today for taking the time to share your work with us. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Desmond.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks for having us.
Great. So that concludes our session today, and have a great day. And thanks again, everybody, for attending. See you next time.